Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Kevin Nilson, and I lead the Technical Solutions Engineering team for Google Cast. And today what I'm going to do is talk to you about some of the latest features for Google Cast. But before I do that, I know that there's some of you who are watching who may not be familiar with Google Cast, so I want to give a really quick overview. So Google Cast is made up of senders and receivers. And what senders are is your mobile phone, such as Android, iOS, or a Chrome browser. And that's, that controls the video playback. And then the video playback is done actually in an HTML5 receiver. And that runs often in something like a Chromecast or a Chromecast Ultra, Chromecast Audio, or even a Google Home. And so let's look at how that interaction behaves and how it happens. And so you see here in this illustration that someone is watching video playback on their phone. And they're watching that playback, but they look up and they see the big screen. And they think, I'd like to see that up on that bigger screen. And so what they do is they go down their phone, they click the cast icon, and that casts the video up to their television. At that point, their sender, or phone or sender, becomes a remote control and lets them control video playback. Now I want to talk about the Cast Application Framework. So the Cast Application Framework is a framework that has a lot of great advantages. And really what we've gone out and tried to do is to create a framework that is really built from the ground up around building a simple media application experience for developers. We wanted to build something that's more reliable and has UI widgets out of the box so that when you go to build a Cast Application Framework and a Cast integration, you write a whole lot less code. Last year at Google I/O, right here in Shoreline Amphitheater, we actually launched the Cast Application Framework for iOS and Android. And then later in the fall, we launched that for the Chrome Web Sender. And what I'm excited today to announce is that we are launching the Cast Application Framework Receiver very, very soon. And I'm going to give you a sneak peek and show you a bunch of the code. And we actually had a lot of our top developers that came into Mountain View down to Google Campus earlier this week. And we gave a hands-on lab for those developers where they could get a sneak peek, try it out, but most importantly, so that we could gather a lot of feedback from them, so that we know when we launch this, it's ready and better than ever. And one of the real advantages, or one of the real things that we're trying to do with the new Cast Application Framework Receiver is make sure that it's voice ready. So, as I mentioned, last year we launched the Cast Application Framework for Android, iOS, and the Web Sender. And this is just a highlight of some of the partners who've gone out there and done that migration. And for them, they've got a lot of great feedback from their users. Their users have really loved the experience, where it's gone, and specifically, I do want to call out that folks have found their applications to be much more reliable. Now I want to share with you a simple showcase from one of our top partners listed on the previous slide. And this is about 2 months of data. And so if you kind of watch that green line go across, you can see that Playback was very constant. And then all of a sudden, when they migrated to the Cast Application Framework, Playback increased dramatically. And so we really wanted to look and see, what caused that? What was the reason? And so we started overlaying other data on top to try to see what else changed. And what we saw is that connections greatly disconnected. And you think about that, that doesn't really make sense. Why would connections decrease when Playback increases? And what we realized after digging a little bit deeper is that basically what was happening is reconnection was failing due to code that was in there previously. And so with the Cast Application Framework, we really want to handle reconnection logic out of the box for all of you to make it much easier and give a much better experience. Now I'll talk about integration with the Google Assistant and voice. Many of you will remember from last year at Google I/O where we announced the Google Home. And what's really nice about the Google Home, it brings the far field mic into your home, often into your living room. where you can ask it questions, do a lot of interesting things, and then obviously control video and audio playback in your living room or other places of your home. And one of the really nice parts for a Google Cast developer is a Google Home is also a cast receiver. So all the code that you wrote to integrate with Chromecast or Chromecast Audio or Chromecast Ultra is also the exact same code to make your app work on Google Home. So as I've began using Google Home with my family, one of the things that I really realized for myself is that there's nothing more natural than voice. And it's been very eye-opening. These are my two youngest boys, and seeing them even leverage their voice to control things in my home has been absolutely amazing. And I want to share with you a story from about a month ago. I took my family to Disneyland, and we did a long drive, drove down to LA, and when we got to our hotel down in Santa Monica, the boys, quickly held each other's hands and ran throughout the hotel trying to turn things on with their voice, sort of imitating what they've seen their father do so many times. And it became so apparent to me that this next generation, when they look at the world, they think about doing that control with their voice. Turning on the light switch never occurred to them. It's so natural, and I think for you, this is the opportunity for you to go out there, start voice enabling your media applications right away so you're ready for that. Many of you will remember from the keynote just yesterday some of the really awesome things that we showed of integrating speaking to the Google Home and showing additional data on the TV. And so here's an example that Rishi had shown, and you can see down at the bottom the chips that are suggesting additional ways you can filter that data. And it really brings the assistant together with the Chromecast and the Google Home and gives a great experience for your users. Now I want to go ahead and talk about the new Cast Application Framework receiver that I'm announcing here at Google I/O. And that receiver, we want it to be significantly more reliable and voice ready out of the box. And with that receiver, what we're hoping is it has all the same advantages that you saw with the other parts of the Cast Application Framework. And that is having UI widgets built out of the box and ready, control for voice out of the box, and a much more reliable experience where developers are writing significantly less code to get that great experience. So here's a list of some of the things that you can do. One of those being voice control, such as asking, what's playing on my TV? So to do that with a new Cast Application Framework receiver, you actually don't have to write any code at all. You get that. You get that out of the box with the new receiver. You're also able to do things like turning on and off captions, switching on and off, changing audio tracks, or controlling the experience, such as pausing, resuming, or seeking. The new receiver also has a lot of improvements. And we already mentioned the voice interactions. There's also a whole list of other things that you can see here. But most importantly, you're going to write a whole lot less code and get more features out of the box. And really what we wanted to do is one of the main underlying principles was take our media player and integrate that into the receiver for the API surface, so that you had a single API surface that was much simpler than dealing with them separately. So now let's jump into the code. So the code that we have here is the simplest code to create a receiver application. And what you'll do is start by creating a custom element, adding the Cast media player, and then from there you'll add one JavaScript library, the Cast Framework JS, and then you're going to grab an instance of the Cast receiver context and call start. And so that's all the code you have to write. This receiver will work, it'll play, it'll pause, it'll scrub, it'll have voice control ready for you. But a lot of people need some additional custom logic in their application. And so here's an example of how do you deal with loading a different stream on your receiver than what you have in your mobile phone, which is a very common use case, because a lot of people will use a 4K stream on Chromecast, while on their phone they're going to use a much lighter weight stream with a lower resolution. And so what we've introduced to make this possible, following AOP principles, would be a message interceptor. And so you can see here, I've got the player, created a message interceptor, and then basically I'm intercepting the load request. And load is basically the play command. And inside of the load request, I'm going to go ahead and I have a private API that I've written where I'm going to go out and fetch those assets and figure out from the ID what URL do I actually want to play. And then you can see here I'm able to use a promise, and when the promise completes, then I'll set the, when I get my response, I'll go ahead and set my contents ID and then return it. And that's all you need to do. Now I want to talk about, well, what happened if the API call had failed and you do have a failure? So here I've got a verify credentials call that I made when the load request came in. And then you can see in the catch, I set the error type to load failure, and I'm setting the error reason to authentication expired. And so you definitely want to make sure that you're handling these errors, and it's very simple to do that within the promise. Another thing that we've created is a playback config object. And really what we're trying to do is to create a single object that holds all of your configuration. Because previously, you had to go throughout the code in various places and add all this configuration. We wanted to be able to read these properties from a single location. And so you can see some examples here, such as setting the initial bandwidth. So you can see here I set it to 2 megabit for the adaptive bit rate, setting which license server that you're going to use with the license URL, and then whether or not you're passing credentials with each manifest request that go across with the headers, the HTTP headers. Another thing that we added was a simple single line of code that allows you to get access to both text tracks and audio tracks. And those of you who've worked with Cast SDK in the past know that previously this took a lot of code. It was a lot of code. And this is just one example of an area where we looked at what optimizations can we make for common use cases that developers are doing to make it really simple with the Cast Application Framework receiver. There at the bottom, you can see a single line of code that allows you to look up tracks by language. And so where this is really important is when you're integrating with voice. And someone asks, show the closed captions in Spanish, for example. Here you have just a single line of code that'll let you look up all available tracks in Spanish, or in English here in this example. Now I want to talk about our eventing framework that we've added. And so one example of eventing where you may want to use this would be to handle analytics. So what we've tried to do is make it possible for you to put all your analytics in its own file rather than scattered throughout all of your logic. And so you can see here on the player manager, I've added an event listener to listen to all events. And so when any event, no matter what type it is, I send that off to my analytics server, such as Google Analytics, Firebase Analytics. And then at the bottom, you'll see I've done the same thing, but only subscribing to playback events. And so when I get a playback event, you can see at the bottom where I'm able to pull out the media time where that event happened. So then I can ask questions like, for example, if we find often that we're having some sort of a buffering event happening early in our video, then we may want to adjust our initial adaptive bitrate settings so that we're taking a lower bit rate so that we don't have to deal with so much buffering for our users. Another feature that we've added is the ability to do UI binding. So if you want to go crazy and build a UI that's a lot different than what we give you out of the box in the UI controls that we provide, here's an example. It's a bit of a sneak peek. We're still working on the APIs, but it'll look something very similar to this. And this is some code that at the top, we're doing a bunch of setup for Angular. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Angular. And then basically what we're doing is binding the player to the player's data. And then at the bottom, you can see in a handlebar mustache type syntax where we're actually, every time the current time changes or the duration changes, those are bound with a single line of code. Lastly, one of the things that many of you would want to do is style or theme things. And so you can remember you added the cast media player. It's a single custom element to your page. And then what you'd like to do is be able to theme it. And so you can see here where I set a theme hue. And so that's a single value there of blue. Or in this example, I go from yellow to green. And then also able to set the URL for my logo and splash images and things like that. Now, I want to change gears and talk about the Web Sender. The Web Sender launched last fall. It's available for all of you to use today. And I want to go ahead and show you some of the basic concepts there. And before I really dive into the code, I want to talk about some of the changes we've made in Chrome. So one of the things we've done in Chrome is we've made a tighter integration with Cast. So now you're able to actually right-click and cast a piece of content. Previously, to use Cast within the Chrome browser, users had to install a Chrome extension. And that Chrome extension would give you the Cast icon up in the top of the browser like you see here. What has changed for Chrome is that there are many users or new users who may not have that Chrome extension. So a tip for all of you, do make sure that you add a Cast icon to all of your pages that have a player. And so an example here you can see in the player in the middle on the right where we've got the Cast icon right there on the player. Because otherwise, it would be a hidden feature that would only be found by right-clicking. Now I want to talk about the code to do it. So let's start on the bottom on this one, a little bit different. So you can see I've added a button, and I've set it is of type cast button. And then just above that, I'm loading the cast sender.js, and I'm passing a single parameter of load the cast application framework. And that basically tells us that you're doing this with the cast application framework rather than our legacy web sender. And then at the top, we're going to add a window list, or bind a function to the window so that basically you can know whether or not you're running on Chrome. And if you are running on Chrome, then you have cast, and then we're going to go ahead and set your application ID so we know which app to run when someone clicks the cast icon. Now let's talk about media playback. So when the user wants to go ahead and play a piece of media in the cast application framework web sender, what we do is go ahead and get an instance of the cast context, get the current session, and have that ready so that we have a cast session. Then we're going to go ahead and create a media information object. And this is a domain object that represents a piece of media. We'll create a load request, and load is basically play. We'll create that load request, give it the media information object, and then call load media. Within the load media, when it succeeds, you want to wait for that load to succeed before you go ahead and call player pause. What we're going to need to do is create a new remote player and then pass the remote player controller that player and call player pause. So it's pretty simple to get a web sender up and running, quite a bit simpler and easier than what we've done before. Styling also very similar, where here you can see we styled everything with the ID of cast button. And then if you look at the bottom where we added the ID of cast button, and then here we're able to set the connected color to green and the disconnected color to white. Now I want to talk about some of the updates that we've made on the mobile senders for the cast application framework. And that would be both Android and iOS. So let's start with some of the Android stuff that we've done. So these are a list of many of the improvements across the mobile senders. So one of the first things that we did in Android was really provide detailed documentation on how to style the UI widgets that are provided. Because what we want to do is provide you a widget that has all the functionality and all the code to work, and even though you didn't write all that code, it looks exactly like the rest of your app and is able to be styled and themed. And so as the year went on, we implemented and documented how to do this so that you can make these experiences look amazing for your users. Another thing that we added was the ability to configure what buttons show up in your mini controller. And so if you look down on the bottom, you can see on the left that we have just one button, a play or pause button. But if you would like to customize it to be able to rewind backwards or forward and add those buttons, all you need to do is add a single array in your resource, add an array in your resource that specifies the buttons you would like to have in your mini player. And it looks exactly the same if you'd like to configure the buttons within your expanded controller or your full screen casting experience. Now I want to talk about styling on iOS. So iOS is a little bit different because we don't have all the power like you'd have with Styles, XML, and Android. So we had to build something programmatic to have the same kind of features. And really what we were trying to do is achieve something that had a cascading effect, so you didn't have to write that much code to apply the same theme in several places within your application. And so let's go ahead and walk through the code. So I'm getting a shared instance of the GCK UI style, and then what I'm doing is walking from the cast views to the media control to the mini controller and setting its body text to be read. So that's a very specific command, a very specific piece that I'd like to change. And then if you look at the next line, I'm setting all cast views background color to be blue. And so you have the flexibility to determine if you want things to control broadly across all the views or just across specific ones. And you can see down at the bottom the breakdown where we break down between the instructions, device control, media control, and all the different screens. Now I want to give you a sneak peek of some of the things that are coming really soon for the Cast Application Framework Receiver. And I want to talk about ads. So ads will come very soon, but it'll come after we release that public beta and after we finally release the Cast Application Framework Receiver. We'll bring in the support for ads. But I want to give you a sneak peek today. So one of the things that we've always done when working with ads, our users have had to do, or developers have had to do, is provide a lot of custom fields. So we didn't have structure around the data that represented an ad. And so the problem that we had without having structure around that data is it made it impossible for us within the mobile senders to know how to react when you're within an ad because there was no structure. And so what we've done to address that is introduce this notion of break clips. Those are the media that's going to be played for your ad and their duration, and then define where those breaks happen within your piece of content. And what this does is really gives us that structure that lets us say, when you enter an ad, let's disable skipping. So users can't scrub out of ads or skip past them, which is an experience that most of us want in our applications so we can monetize well. So the example I'm showing here shows how to pass that information from the sender. But for most applications, you'd like to do that on the receiver. So let's show how to control that from the receiver. So we're going to use an interceptor again, and we're going to intercept that load request. So when the load request comes in to play a piece of media, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and call out to an API with a promise to fetch our ads. Once we get those ads back, then we can set the break clips and define where those breaks occur. That's all you have to do. It's very, very convenient so that basically you can change those ads on the fly from the receiver. Because often you want to control that from the receiver, and you want to control that as each piece of media loads. Now I want to talk about queuing. So in the Cast Application Framework, 2 years ago at I/O, we actually launched a queuing API. And what we found was it was difficult for developers to use. And so what we wanted to do was to create a new queuing mechanism that really started from the fundamental thinking that your application has a queue when you're not casting. And so you have existing APIs, probably some form of a cloud queue, and we wanted to be able to integrate with that cloud queue so that you could have an experience that as users went in and out of casting, it continued to work and made it really, really easy for you. So here's a quick example, and you can see the way that it does is we start by having you extend a base class of QBase. And then from there, you can override a lot of methods. So here, for example, is the load method. So I've overrode the load method, actually go out there and fetch my data. So this is where I'm calling out to my cloud, asking what items are in this playlist, for example. So if someone asks for a load for a playlist, you're going to go ahead and look up what are the songs or what are the videos within that particular playback. You can set things like where would I like to start within that playback and what timestamp would I like them to start. And so this is a bit of a sneak peek. The code may change a little bit, but this is really what we're starting to work on today and gathering feedback from a lot of our top developers and partners as to what they'd like to see. So if you do have any thoughts, we'd love to hear them. Please come and see me afterwards, and we'd love to hear from all of you. Next, I want to talk about live. And this is what we're going to do after we launch the Cast Application Framework Receiver. What we have found as we reviewed several of our top apps who deal with live is we found that live is a little bit different for every single app. And maybe not every app, but there's several ways to do it. And so what we didn't want to do is put together something that's too simplistic that doesn't give our developers the power to have a turnkey experience for handling live. And so we've been collecting data from a lot of different partners and developers and looking at this. And what we want to do is to provide an implementation that gives you the flexibility to define how live works for you. Some apps you can pause and have a DVR window. Some apps you can scrub. Others you can't. Others have sliding windows of where you can rewind back throughout. Some of them, from the start of an event, you can scroll. And so these are just some examples of some of this complex logic. And we want to try to build something that lets you do all of that and make it really, really simple. And so this is what we're looking at doing later in the year as we move forward. And so I'm really excited to see that happen because I know it's going to help a lot of developers. The last thing I want to talk to you about is the Chromecast Preview program. And what this is it's the ability for you to test your code against our newest or unreleased software. And so when we think it's ready to ship, and we think we're ready to push platform changes out to users, we push it out to devices that are on the Chromecast Preview program. And so it's a great opportunity for you to register some devices in your test lab against this, add them to this program so that you can make sure that your application isn't going to break when we push that out. Another great advantage that you'll get is we have thousands of devices that are registered as part of the Chromecast Preview program. And so we've got thousands of developers and thousands of just regular users out there using your app against the preview program. So even if you don't find problems, other users out in the field have the opportunity to find those and report those as well. So I highly encourage all of you to go try this out and start using it as part of your QA regression test and making sure that your app is as good as it can be. And with that, what I want to do is tell you about a few resources that you have where you can learn more. The first is developergoogle.com/cast. You can find all of our documentation and our samples out there. Next is Stack Overflow. So on Stack Overflow, we actually have a team of people who are actually answering questions and making sure the right and best questions are available. So do look in Stack Overflow. We highly encourage it, and we have a team of people out there working on that. Next is the G+ developer community. this is a great place to see announcements. So, for example, when we launch the beta for the Cast Application Framework receiver shortly, we'll post a message on Google Plus so that that's available and you're aware of it, so you can go and try it out and give us that feedback. And finally, out on YouTube with Google developers, you can see a lot of great videos, both on Cast and all the other things that you learned here at Google I/O. And with that, I want to thank all of you for coming, and happy casting.